Hello, everybody. This is going to be just a small addendum for dictionaries, mostly to help you with your projects that are coming up. And um, the questions always becomes, well, what happens if you want to string a bunch of things together? So, like, I think I gave the baseball example. You know, you have a player, his stats, meaning like maybe his base batting average, his home runs, etc. How do you handle it? Well, there's a couple ways that you can handle it. The first way is to actually create these things, called lists, which we're already associated with. So in the case of, I pulled out our old project and I put a little bit more in there. So in the old one, we just say Bob, cat, bunny, dog, and you can add lists to these things, meaning um, putting where we had the string literal before and putting a list in there. So when I run this, dog and cat will go into where pets Diane is because that's what we set it up to be. So let's go ahead and do it real quick. Now I just want you to look at the first line because we haven't really addressed the second line yet. Notice that dog and cat have been put in there. Well, this is good if you're for your projects if you're doing a one-to-one match. So in other words, dog and cat doesn't really work in this situation, um, but because let's talk about the because first. Because uh, there are multiple values of it, so it's not a different field. So like if I were to say dog and then 13 for his age, that would make sense. So now all of a sudden I can have Diane, who is kind of like the primary key, and if you know about databases, you can only have one primary key, and that's unique. So now Diane can have a dog that's 13. Well, likewise, if Bob is going to have a cat, he should have his own list, and it should be of two elements: the type and the age. Same with Melanie, type and age. And this space, what's after every not semicolon, regular colon, is going to be replaced with a list that you can populate. Now, how do you populate it? Well, you can just do it this way, but remember, you can always use loops too, um, because as opposed to dictionaries, these all have placements. Remember, this is the 0th placement, this is the 1 placement, and you can just populate these guys in that order. Now, so that's one way to handle it. And just say you have a field. So you'd say essentially, let's give a baseball name out there. And I'm trying to think. I'm drawing a blank on baseball players, but let's go with like Miguel Cabrera. So Miguel's name would go here, and you could leave that in quotes, and then his batting average. His batting average would go here, and then his home runs would go there. Okay, there's just 3 stats. But we could also do it in 2 separate pieces. So in other words, we could have Miguel Cabrera up here and then create a second dictionary with Miguel Cabrera, one holding his what do you call it, his batting average, one holding his home runs. I don't know why I keep forgetting that. But anyways, so that would work well. Here you would not want the lists. Unless these lists are equal in size, you don't want that. This isn't going to work because ultimately what I want to do with this guy is put them in a for loop. And when you get mismatching things in for loops, then it's going to throw an error. So in other words, because this has 2 entries and this has 1 entry, that's going to be good, because what I'd want to do is just print everything out as is, but you can't actually print lists directly in this way. Because it has to be converted to a string first, or opened up and have the strings brought out. Maybe that's probably a better analogy. So what I'm going to do here is give all these guys unique pieces. So now let's go back to the owner's pet names. Here I have the same keys, Bob, Melanie, Stan, and they have the type of animal they have and their appropriate names. I put in quotes pets Diane and pets names Diane because now I don't want them to be variables. I want them to have a single one. If we have multiple names, then we probably should create multiple pet names. So we should have pet names 1, pet names 2, pet names 3, and leave them blank, let's say for Melanie, Stan, and Bob if they don't have extra pets. Now when I print this, now we can take a look at that top line when we'll get back to the other one later. Now we both have Diane, Bob, Melanie, and then we have kind of like almost like a parallel array if you're familiar with those. But because we have these keys, we can do a whole bunch of things. We can play with the keys themselves, or we can just take a really simple approach and create a double loop. And if you remember from the book or from one of my talks, you can have 2 variables in a dictionary. I usually stands for the key, or I should say the first letter in here stands for the key, and then this stands for the input. So, and then the reason why I'm using items is because items looks at everything, not just the keys. So, and then I do the same thing for pet names. I do have 2, again, key, and then the associated pet name with it is going to go into L. So if I say I is equal to K, well, what is I? I is the variable that are here, only here. It's got to be Diane, Bob, Melanie, or Stan, and likewise K has to be Diane, Bob, Melanie, or Stan. So if I do an if statement, say if they're equal, so in other words when Diane equals Diane, then I can just link everything up together and spit out my needed information. So here I do a print where I say I. Well, what is I? I is going to be the key of the first one, so it's going to start off with a Diane and wherever she matches, because remember they have to match here in order to print out the statement. So in this case we have a Diane here and a Diane, so it's going to match. And so Diane's going to go in here, and then has a J. Well, what is J? Well, J is this, the second part of the owners, or yeah, I guess the associated field with the key. So J is going to be in pets Diane or cat. Well, for Diane it's going to be pets Diane. For Bob it's going to be cat. So let's Diane has a pets Diane named pet names Diane, because remember L is the second part of this, so it's over here. So when I run this, it'll look weird for Diane. Diane has pets Diane named pets Diane named pets Diane, pet name Diane, easy for me to say, and then but it makes more sense here. So Bob has a cat named Timmy. Melanie has a bunny named Peaches, and sure enough, those correspond together. The 3 owners is just from last time that we looked at it. So I would say do it either way. I mean, if you love lists and you find lists are much more convenient, then go ahead and shove the lists in there. Just again, make sure if this is a list of 3 things, make sure this has a list of 3 things that are corresponding. So if this is a list of phone number, email, and Social Security, then this should be phone number, email, and Social Security, and so forth. And then you can kind of rummage through those. Is there an easier way to do it? I don't know. I think it depends on the way you think and you set this up. There's probably doing lists might cut down on the information, or excuse me, the typing that you have to do, but I wouldn't necessarily uh, say that it's going to come out, everything's going to come out easier, because remember, when you get to a list, you got to again, when you want to print them out down here, you have to unpack them. So I'd have to have another for list here. I'm going through each list item. So in other words, if I equals k for m to n, I'd have to put down here, right? Actually, I might want to just do a range there. So from range 0 to 1, you know, print out uh, pets Diane 0, pets Diane 1, you know, in order to unpackage those. Um, think about the way you want to organize it. Um, it's probably good to kind of think about what makes sense to you first before you go in and just write. You know, from like programming logic, what I'd have you do is you do a flowchart or a pseudocode. I would suggest that for here as well. You don't have to go nuts. Remember, these are going to be large databases, so but start them off at like 2 entries, you know, and then say, okay, this is going to be easier for me. Maybe you want to do 3 or 4 just to see how hard it's going to get as you expand it, but you don't have to do more than that. And of course, if you have any questions, well, that's what the Q&A is for. All right, we'll talk to you soon.